My name is Yusuf Al-Rahman. I am 38 years old, and before I tell you what Jesus did in my life, you must first understand the man I used to be, because the man speaking to you now would have terrified the younger version of himself. I was born into wealth and influence in Kuwait, into a family known not only for power, but for religious authority, the kind of family people mention carefully, lowering their voices out of respect. From childhood, I was taught that honor was heavier than happiness, and obedience was more valuable than truth. My father believed faith must be enforced to survive, and so love in our home often sounded like correction. I memorized Quranic verses before I learned how to express fear or sadness, and every achievement was measured by how well I represented Islam to the outside world. People admired my discipline, my confidence, my certainty, but none of them saw the quiet exhaustion growing inside me. I learned early that doubt was dangerous, so I buried questions before they could form. When other boys dreamed about adventure, I dreamed about approval. When they laughed freely, I monitored my behavior, afraid of dishonoring my family name. Religion became structure, structure became identity, and identity became a prison I could not recognize. By my 20s, I was respected, wealthy, and deeply empty. I performed prayers perfectly. I gave charity publicly and spoke about devotion with authority, yet every night a strange heaviness followed me into sleep. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why obedience brought no peace. I never admitted this to anyone because a man in my position was expected to guide others, not confess confusion. Then Amina entered my life. She was gentle in a way that felt unfamiliar, not weak but alive, as if faith to her was something warm instead of something heavy. Our marriage was arranged yet peaceful at first, and I remember noticing how she spoke about God with curiosity rather than fear. She asked questions no one dared to ask, questions about mercy, forgiveness, and whether God desired love more than performance. I answered her carefully using the teachings I had memorized, but inside her questions disturbed something fragile within me. She would watch sunsets quietly and whisper prayers that sounded personal, almost intimate, and I found myself both drawn to and unsettled by her sincerity. I thought leadership meant correcting her softness, shaping her understanding to match the expectations placed upon us. I did not realize she was seeing cracks in my soul long before I could admit they existed. Outwardly, my life looked perfect: influence, respect, and religious certainty. Inwardly, I felt like an actor repeating lines written by generations before me. Sometimes I stood during prayer surrounded by hundreds of voices and felt completely alone, as if God heard everyone except me. I convinced myself this emptiness was a test of discipline, not a warning of spiritual hunger. If you are listening right now and you understand what it feels like to live a life everyone praises while your heart quietly searches for something real, then you already know the beginning of my story. Before I continue, I want to ask you gently to subscribe. Like this video, comment, and share it, because testimonies like mine often reach people who are searching in secret, just as I once was. At that time, I believed I was strong, faithful, and unshakable, but I had no idea that everything defining my identity was already moving toward a moment that would break me completely and force me to confront a truth I had spent my entire life trying not to see. Every morning of my adult life began before sunrise, not because I desired God, but because discipline had been carved into me so deeply that disobedience felt like suffocation. The call to prayer echoed across Kuwait City, and I moved automatically, washing, reciting, bowing, repeating motions my body knew better than my heart. People believed I possessed strong faith because I never missed a prayer, never questioned tradition, never allowed hesitation to appear on my face. Inside, however, it was something restless followed me everywhere like a shadow that refused to leave. I remember standing at the mosque surrounded by men who admired me, listening to the imam speak about submission bringing peace, yet my chest felt tight, as though peace belonged to everyone else. As a child, mistakes during recitation were corrected harshly. My teacher once struck my hand with a thin stick when I mispronounced a verse, telling me fear protected the soul from rebellion. That moment never left me. From then on, I associated God with pressure rather than comfort, expectation rather than closeness. Even success failed to quiet the unease growing inside me. Wealth expanded, responsibilities increased, and my reputation strengthened. Yet nights became heavier. I began having recurring dreams where I stood alone in a vast desert, calling out to God, hearing only wind answering me. I woke each time with a pounding heart and an unexplainable sadness. I hid these experiences carefully because men like me were supposed to guide others, not confess spiritual dryness. Amina noticed changes before I did. She watched me closely during meals. Her eyes filled with concern I pretended not to understand. One evening she asked softly, "Do you ever feel tired in your soul?" I laughed dismissively and told her faith required endurance, but her question lingered long after the conversation ended. She began asking deeper questions over time, and not argumentative but sincere. She wondered why forgiveness sometimes felt distant, why fear seemed stronger than love in religious teachings, and whether God desired relationship instead of constant performance. Each question unsettled me because I had no answers beyond repetition. I reminded her to be careful, warning that curiosity could lead people away from truth, though secretly I feared where my own thoughts might go if I allowed them freedom. Her calmness during these conversations frustrated me. She spoke about mercy as if she had personally experienced it, while I relied on memorized explanations. Slowly, I sensed a quiet change in her demeanor. She seemed lighter, more peaceful, as though carrying a secret source of comfort she had not yet revealed. I noticed her spending more time alone with her phone, smiling gently at messages, or listening through earphones late at night. When I asked what occupied her attention, she answered casually, saying she was reading reflections about faith. Something about her tone felt different, but I dismissed my concern, convincing myself I was imagining things. Still, an uneasiness settled into our home. I began watching her more closely without admitting why. One night I woke unexpectedly and saw faint light glowing from beneath the study door. Her voice whispered softly, unfamiliar words spoken with emotion I had never heard during formal prayers. I stood in the hallway frozen, listening without understanding, sensing that whatever she was discovering was changing her in ways I could neither control nor comprehend. At that moment I felt fear rising inside me, not only for her but for myself, because deep down I knew that peace had entered our home from somewhere outside everything I had ever trusted, and I was terrified of what that might mean. I did not confront her immediately, because fear often disguises itself as patience. And for several days I pretended nothing had changed while quietly observing every movement she made. The house felt different, softer somehow, as if an unseen presence had settled into the silence between us. Amina moved with calm confidence, humming quietly while preparing tea, her eyes carrying a peace that irritated me because I could not explain its source. One evening while she showered, her phone vibrated repeatedly on the table beside me. I told myself I would ignore it. Yet curiosity mixed with suspicion pulled my hand forward. The screen lit up, revealing a notification from an application I did not recognize at first, but when I opened it, my breath stopped. A Bible app filled the display, verses highlighted in soft colors, notes written in Arabic beside passages, speaking about love, forgiveness, and salvation. My heart pounded violently, as if betrayal itself had taken physical form. I scrolled further and heard faint audio playing through her earphones left behind. A pastor's voice speaking gently about Jesus, welcoming the weary and giving rest to the burdened. Rage rose instantly, fueled by years of teaching that apostasy destroyed families and dishonored generations. When Amina stepped back into the room and saw the phone in my hand, her expression changed not to fear, but sadness. "You were hiding this from me," I demanded, my voice shaking. She did not deny it. Instead, she sat across from me calmly and said, "I was searching for God, Yusuf, not trying to betray you." Her words felt like an accusation against everything I believed. I reminded her of our responsibilities, our families, the consequences of leaving Islam. She listened quietly and then said something that pierced deeper than anger. "For the first time in my life, I feel loved by God, not afraid of Him. I could not understand how faith could exist without fear. To me, religion preserved order. To her, it had become healing. Over the following days, our conversations intensified. I quoted scholars and warnings while she spoke about grace and forgiveness, describing Jesus as someone who saw her pain and gave her peace. Her calmness made my certainty feel fragile. Desperate for reassurance, I sought counsel from a respected religious leader within our circle. He listened carefully before warning me that curiosity toward Christianity was dangerous deception and that allowing such influence within my household would bring shame. His words ignited urgency inside me. I returned home determined to end what I believed was spiritual corruption. That night the air felt heavy, every sound amplified by tension. I confronted Amina again, demanding she abandon what she was reading. Tears filled her eyes, yet her voice remained steady. "I cannot deny what I have experienced," she said. "Jesus changed my heart." Hearing that name spoken with devotion inside my home felt unbearable. Anger mixed with fear, fear mixed with pride, and pride silenced compassion. I raised my voice louder than ever before, accusing her of dishonoring me, dishonoring our families, dishonoring God Himself. She did not argue back. Instead, she whispered that she forgave me even before I understood why I was angry. Those words confused me more than resistance would have. The argument stretched late into the night, emotions spiraling beyond control, and as silence finally fell between us, I sensed that something irreversible had begun, something neither authority nor tradition could stop, and deep inside I felt a terrifying realization forming that the peace she carried might be stronger than the fear that ruled me. That night lives inside my memory like a wound that never fully closes. And even now I struggle to speak about it, because every detail reminds me of the man I became when fear replaced humanity. The argument continued long after midnight, our voices echoing through rooms that once felt peaceful. I remember pacing back and forth, my thoughts racing with warnings I had heard since childhood about dishonor and judgment. Amina stood near the window, trembling but calm, holding her phone tightly against her chest, as if protecting something sacred. I demanded obedience, as demanded certainty, demanded that she return to the life we were expected to live. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said quietly, "Yusuf, I am not your enemy. I only want truth." Those words felt unbearable because they exposed the possibility that I might be wrong. Anger surged through me, fueled by pride and generations of fear disguised as righteousness. I spoke harshly, saying things no husband should ever say, accusing her of destroying our family and inviting shame upon us. But she did not respond with anger. Instead, she whispered a prayer under her breath, words I did not recognize then, but later understood were asking Jesus for mercy. The calmness in her voice made me feel powerless, and powerlessness terrified me more than anything else. I moved closer, demanding she stop speaking about Jesus, demanding she promise never to read those words again. She shook her head slowly, not in defiance but in sorrow. "I cannot deny Him," she said gently. In that moment, something inside me broke. Years of pressure, expectation, and suppressed doubt exploded into a storm I could not control. The room blurred with emotion, voices raised, movements desperate and chaotic. Then suddenly, everything became still. Silence fell so heavily that even my breathing sounded foreign. Amina collapsed, and time itself seemed to stop. I remember calling her name repeatedly, confusion replacing anger as reality unfolded before me. There was no victory, no sense of restored honor, only a terrifying emptiness spreading through my chest. Her eyes met mine briefly, filled not with hatred but compassion that I did not deserve. With fading strength, she whispered words that continue to haunt me. "Jesus forgives you." Those were the last words she ever spoke to me. The silence afterward was unbearable. Family members arrived quickly, voices urgent, decisions made without emotion. Some spoke about protecting reputation, about controlling the narrative, us about maintaining dignity. They called the tragedy necessary, a consequence of disobedience, a restoration of honor. I nodded mechanically, unable to process what had happened. Inside, however, something collapsed completely. I expected relief after defending everything I had been taught to protect, but instead, guilt wrapped around me like chains. That night, I sat alone in our room long after everyone left, staring at the empty space where she once sat reading quietly. The house felt colder, lifeless, as if light itself had withdrawn. Every sound reminded me of her presence, the soft echo of footsteps, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. When I finally lay down, sleep refused to come. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, calm and forgiving, repeating those final words. I began to realize that whatever I believed I had defended, I had lost something infinitely more valuable. For the first time in my life, prayer felt impossible. I did not know how to speak to God anymore, because deep inside I feared that heaven itself had witnessed what I had done, and the silence surrounding me that night felt heavier than any judgment I had ever imagined. After that night, time stopped moving normally for me. Days passed, people visited, condolences were offered in careful language, and life around me continued as if order had been restored. Yet inside I felt like a man buried beneath invisible weight. The family members praised my strength, telling me I had protected honor and upheld faith, but their words sounded distant, almost unreal. Every compliment felt like an accusation echoing inside my conscience. I returned to public prayers because routine was expected, standing shoulder to shoulder with men who respected me, repeating verses I had known since childhood, yet the words felt hollow. Instead of comfort, recitation stirred anxiety. My voice trembled slightly during prayer, and for the first time, I feared someone might notice weakness behind my composure. Nights became unbearable. Sleep arrived only in fragments, interrupted by dreams that felt more real than waking life. I saw Amina standing in light while I remained surrounded by darkness, unable to reach her no matter how hard I tried. She never accused me. She only looked at me with sadness and peace that confused me deeply. I would wake suddenly, heart racing, whispering prayers desperately. But the familiar rituals no longer quieted my mind. The silence I once felt occasionally now followed me constantly. I began avoiding mirrors because I did not recognize the man staring back. Food lost taste, conversations felt forced, and laughter around me sounded inappropriate, as though the world refused to acknowledge the storm inside my soul. One night, unable to endure the memories, I searched the internet secretly, something I had never done before without purpose. I typed questions carefully, afraid even of digital evidence. Why do Christians talk about forgiveness? Can God forgive murder? Who is Jesus really? Testimonies appeared on the screen. Stories of people leaving Islam after dreams, encounters, or experiences of peace. I read them with skepticism at first, expecting deception, yet something about their honesty unsettled me. Many described fear similar to mine, emptiness hidden behind religious performance. My curiosity frightened me, but grief pushed me forward. Eventually, I downloaded a Bible application late at night, my hands shaking as if committing betrayal. I opened randomly and my eyes fell on words that pierced me. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I stared at the verse for a long time, reading it again and again. Rest was something I had never known. The idea that God invited the weary rather than demanding perfection felt unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. I closed the app quickly, overwhelmed by guilt, yet returned minutes later, unable to resist. Night after night I read secretly, comparing passages with everything I had been taught. Instead of anger, I felt confusion mixed with longing. Jesus spoke about loving enemies, forgiving sinners, and offering mercy freely. These teachings disturbed me because they reminded me of Amina's calmness during our final conversation. Slowly, a terrifying thought formed. What if the peace she discovered was real? One evening, exhausted by internal conflict, I sat alone in darkness and tried to pray as I always had, but the words would not come. Instead, I whispered something unfamiliar, uncertain who was listening. "God, if you are real, if you see me, I don't understand anything anymore. Help me." The room remained quiet, yet for the first time since her death, my prayer felt honest rather than performed, and that honesty frightened me more than silence ever had. The night everything changed began like many others, heavy with exhaustion and regret, my mind trapped between memories and questions I could no longer silence. I had spent hours reading from the Bible app in secret, closing it whenever footsteps passed my door, afraid someone might discover what I was doing. That evening, I reached a passage describing Jesus forgiving those who crucified him, asking God to pardon the very people causing his suffering. I could not understand such mercy. Forgiveness had always been conditional in my world, earned through obedience and restored honor. Yet here was a man offering grace freely, even in pain. The thought unsettled me deeply. Eventually, fatigue overcame resistance, and I fell asleep without turning off the light. What happened next felt more real than any dream I had ever experienced. I found myself standing in a vast open place filled with soft brightness, neither day nor night, where silence felt alive rather than empty. At first I was alone, overwhelmed by awareness of my own guilt. Memories surrounded me like shadows, arguments, harsh words, Amina's final moments, each scene replaying without escape. I expected judgment, expected condemnation, yet instead I sensed someone approaching behind me. When I turned, I saw a man clothed in white, radiant yet gentle, his presence carrying authority without intimidation. I cannot fully describe his face except to say it held compassion deeper than anything I had known. Fear gripped me, and I fell to my knees instinctively, unable to meet his eyes. I felt exposed, every hidden thought visible. I waited for accusation, but his voice came softly, calling my name with familiarity that broke something inside me. "Yusuf." The sound carried warmth and sorrow together. I began to speak, trying to defend myself, explaining tradition, honor, expectation, but words failed. Instead, tears came uncontrollably. Images of my actions replayed again. But yet this time I felt not only guilt, but grief for the person I had become. He did not interrupt. When I finally looked up, I expected anger, yet his expression remained filled with mercy. "You are carrying what you were never meant to carry alone," he said gently. I asked who he was, even though my heart already knew. "I am the one she told you about," he replied. At that moment, peace washed over me so strongly that I began trembling. I felt both broken and held at the same time. He spoke about forgiveness, not as permission to escape consequences, but as freedom from chains of shame. He showed me moments from my life, not only failures but wounds I had ignored since childhood, revealing how fear had shaped every decision. Instead of condemning me, he invited me to release the weight I carried. I remember crying, saying I did not deserve mercy. His answer remains etched into my soul. Mercy is not earned. Light surrounded us, and for the first time I felt something I had searched for my entire life, peace without effort. Then I woke suddenly, sitting upright in my bed, tears covering my face, my heart calm in a way I had never experienced. The room looked ordinary, yet everything felt different, as if invisible chains had loosened. I questioned whether exhaustion had created the vision, yet the peace remained long after waking. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn back to the words of Jesus, a reading with hunger rather than curiosity. My behavior changed subtly. Anger faded. Silence felt gentle instead of empty. But transformation does not remain hidden forever, and I soon realized someone close to me had begun noticing the difference, watching carefully, waiting for proof that something within me had shifted in a way that could no longer be concealed. Change does not announce itself loudly at first. It appears quietly in small decisions that others eventually notice. I began praying differently, no longer rushing through recitations, but sitting in silence afterward, thinking about the words of Jesus and the peace I felt since the dream. My family observed these changes immediately. My father asked why I seemed distracted during gatherings. An uncle commented that I no longer corrected others with the same authority. Even the servants noticed I spoke more gently, thanking them instead of issuing commands. I tried to behave normally, but something inside me had shifted permanently. The fear that once controlled me weakened, replaced by an unfamiliar calm. That calm, however, attracted suspicion. One afternoon, my younger cousin entered my study without warning, while I stepped away briefly. When I returned, he stood beside my desk, holding my phone, his expression tense. The Bible app was open on the screen. Time seemed to freeze. He looked at me as though seeing a stranger. Within hours, the entire household knew. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Phones rang constantly. Elders arrived unannounced, their faces heavy with concern disguised as authority. I was called into a private meeting where religious leaders and senior family members sat waiting. Their questions came carefully at first. Had I been exposed to foreign influence? Was grief affecting my judgment? Was I questioning Islam? I tried to explain that I was searching for peace, but my words only deepened their alarm. One imam leaned forward and warned that curiosity toward Christianity was spiritual deception designed to destroy families. Another reminded me that apostasy carried consequences, not only for individuals, but for entire generations. Their voices blended into a storm of pressure, each sentence tightening around me like a cage. Memories from childhood returned vividly, stories of those who abandoned faith and lost everything, warnings repeated to keep us obedient. Fear rose again, a whispering that safety required silence. Yet each time I considered denying what I experienced, I remembered the man in white calling my name with compassion. That memory gave me courage I could not explain. Days passed under constant surveillance. My phone was monitored, my movements questioned, my isolation growing. Friends who once admired me avoided conversation. Some spoke to me only to persuade me to repent publicly and restore honor. Others treated me as spiritually dangerous, as though doubt itself were contagious. My mother cried quietly, begging me not to bring shame upon the family. Her tears wounded me deeply because I loved her, yet truth had begun pulling me in a direction I could not reverse. Late one evening, my father entered my room alone. His voice carried disappointment heavier than anger. He told me I still had time to correct my mistake, to renounce these ideas publicly, and reaffirm loyalty to Islam. "You will lose everything," he warned. "Your name, your protection, your future." I sat silently, torn between fear and conviction. Part of me wanted to surrender just to restore peace, but another part remembered the freedom I felt in that vision. Finally, he delivered the ultimatum clearly. Within days, I must stand before family and religious leaders and publicly reject Jesus, or I would be cut off completely. When he left, the room felt unbearably quiet. I realized the choice before me was no longer theoretical. For the first time in my life, faith required personal decision rather than inherited obedience, and as night fell, I understood that whatever path I chose next would cost me more than I had ever imagined. I spent the next few nights alone, wrestling with a storm inside me that I could no longer ignore. The ultimatum hung over my head like a knife, yet each time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Amina, smiling calmly, whispering about Jesus' forgiveness, as if she had already crossed a threshold I feared to approach. I thought about the man in white in my vision, the peace that had washed over me despite guilt and failure. I realized that denying him now would be a betrayal not only of what I had experienced, but of the freedom I had glimpsed. My heart throbbed with fear and anticipation simultaneously. Every instinct told me to surrender, to save what remained of my reputation, to return to the familiar weight of obedience. Yet another voice, quiet but insistent, reminded me that life without truth was a prison I had no right to inhabit. I knew I had to act, but the consequences terrified me. When I walked into the room where my family waited, their eyes full of expectation and accusation, I could feel the walls of the palace closing in. My father's gaze was stern, the imam's expression unreadable, yet I did not speak immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath and thought of Amina's calmness, the vision, the words from scripture I had memorized late at night. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." My voice trembled at first, but slowly I said, "I will not deny what I have seen. I cannot turn away from him. Shock rippled through the room. Gasps, murmurs, disbelief filled the air. Some family members stepped back, as though I had transformed into a stranger before their eyes. The Imam leaned forward and asked me firmly if I understood the consequences. I nodded. Every loss, every threat, every judgment I had been warned about, I accepted. It felt like stepping into a storm, yet inside me a strange calm anchored me. That night, after the confrontation, I found myself alone in a quiet courtyard. The city lights shimmered on the water, and I felt a sense of clarity I had never known. I reached for my phone. You connected secretly with an online community of believers who prayed with me, their voices a balm to the wounds of shame and fear that still lingered. Tears ran freely as I whispered confessions I had never shared, my heart unburdening slowly. Weeks passed, and I realized that symbolic rituals could mark the beginning of a new life. Yet what mattered most was surrender, honest and full. In the privacy of my room, I was baptized, not publicly, but in spirit and understanding. I felt the water and the words carry away decades of fear, pride, and guilt. I emerged, trembling, lighter than I had ever been, my chest no longer constricted, my mind finally at rest. I understood that leaving everything behind did not mean loss. It meant life. Life shaped not by expectation, honor, or inherited authority, but by freedom through faith. That night I looked toward the stars and whispered a prayer of gratitude, uncertain of what awaited me next, yet certain that I had chosen a path leading to true peace, a path that could never be taken away, no matter the cost. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. A senior imam, flanked by 2 elders from the family council, arrived at my residence with urgency etched into their faces. Their eyes searched mine as though trying to measure the depth of my defiance, the dangerous space I had entered by refusing to recant. I felt a wave of fear, but it was different now, tempered by the peace that had been growing quietly within me since my vision. I invited them into my study and sat across from them, palms pressed together, heart racing, yet grounded by a calm I had never known in my old life. The Imam began, speaking slowly, reminding me of family honor, tradition, and the expectations placed upon a prince of our lineage. "Yusuf, you are at a crossroads," he said. "This path you walk dishonors all we have built, all we have taught." I listened, hearing the weight of their words, but I no longer trembled. Instead, I met their gaze and spoke with humility, the kind that only comes from facing your own guilt and admitting it openly. "I have failed in ways I cannot undo," I said. "I have carried pride, anger, and fear as if they were shields, and in doing so I harmed the person I loved most. I am responsible for that loss." The silence that followed was heavy. I felt every accusation they had prepared for me hang in the air, yet I did not flinch. I continued, my voice steady. "But in my grief, I have encountered mercy. I have seen forgiveness that surpasses human understanding. I have felt a peace I cannot ignore. I speak not to rebel, but to confess that truth exists beyond fear and honor. I cannot deny him." The elders shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment I saw confusion flicker across the Imam's eyes. My words had no anger, no manipulation. It only honesty and repentance. I admitted everything I had carried privately for decades. My failures, my doubts, my fear of God as punishment rather than love. I spoke openly about Amina, about her final moments, about the vision that had changed me, and about the hope I had found in Jesus. I expected hostility, perhaps even punishment, yet something unexpected happened. Their faces revealed not triumph, but unease. It was as if the very authority they wielded felt fragile in the presence of my confession. They asked no further questions. I offered no excuses. I simply stood in the weight of truth, knowing some would never understand, but that I had finally surrendered to what was right. When the meeting ended, I walked away alone, the corridors of the palace stretching long and cold around me. Outside, the city lights glimmered on the water, indifferent to my private struggle. I felt neither fear nor anger, only a release I had never experienced. For the first time in decades, I breathed freely, my shoulders unburdened. My family and religious leaders had rejected the life I had chosen, but their rejection no longer held power over me. I understood fully that standing in truth, even in isolation, was more valuable than a lifetime of obedience born from fear. That night, I whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for acceptance, not for safety, but for courage, the courage to face condemnation, admit guilt, and still embrace the mercy I had found. I realized then that freedom was never about status or reputation. It was about honesty before God and the willingness to follow Him, even when the world turns against you. And in that quiet, alone among strangers and adversaries, I felt the first taste of true peace, knowing I was walking a path I could never turn back from, yet one I would never regret. Now, the years have passed since those nights of fear, grief, and revelation, and I live quietly among a community of believers who do not know my past, yet who have welcomed me without question. Each morning I wake with gratitude, aware that I carry scars I will never forget, scars of loss, shame, and the consequences of decisions that cannot be undone. But I also carry something far greater, redemption and peace that surpass understanding. I still think of Amina every day. Her memory is both painful and beautiful, a reminder of the cost of fear and the power of grace. I remember her calmness, her faith, her willingness to embrace truth even when it threatened everything around her, and I carry that courage within me now. My family remains distant. Some have rejected me completely, while others speak of me only in hushed tones. Their disapproval once terrified me, but it no longer holds sway over my heart. I have learned that God's love is not measured by human approval. Each night I pray differently now. I do not recite out of obligation, but speak from my heart, confessing, thanking, and seeking guidance. I read the Bible openly, meditate on passages that comfort me, and share encouragement with those who quietly struggle with doubt and fear. My life has been transformed not by wealth, status, or obedience, but by the encounter that revealed mercy I could not earn and grace I did not deserve. I dedicate myself to sharing testimonies because I know how isolating secrecy can be, how heavy silence feels when the heart yearns for truth. If my story reaches someone even in part, perhaps they will understand that the search for God's love is worth the risk, worth the pain, worth stepping into uncertainty. I have learned that freedom is not given by family, tradition, or culture. It is granted by God alone. He meets the broken, the burdened, the fearful, and invites them into a life of peace and joy that nothing in this world can remove. My past will always be part of me, yet it does not define me. Today, I walk forward with purpose, sharing what I have learned, that no one is beyond redemption, that grace can enter even the darkest of hearts, and that following Jesus brings freedom no human authority can take away. To those listening now, know this: the path may be difficult, and the cost may seem unbearable, but mercy exists, peace exists, love exists, and it waits for every soul willing to surrender fear, embrace truth, and trust in a God whose forgiveness reaches farther than you can imagine.